There are stories that emerge from the silence of the night, tales as old as time that defy any explanation. Tales that came from the shadows, leaving no trace of identity, just the echo of an event that made hearts soar and minds question what is real. Today, we're going to revisit some of these events, where the only certainty is that something inexplicable happened, and the names are lost in the obscurity of fear. Stay with us if you have the courage to uncover the secrets that the darkness holds. The man in the corner. It started as a whisper, a faint, almost imperceptible sound in the dead of night. Ethan had always been a heavy sleeper, the kind of person who could sleep through thunderstorms, sirens, even the occasional power outage when his ceiling fan clicked off. But for the past week, something had been waking him up at exactly 3 a.m, not a second before, not a second after. At first he dismissed it. Stress, maybe. His body adjusting to a new routine. He had read somewhere that waking up at odd hours was normal. A biological hiccup, nothing more. But as the nights passed, the feeling became stronger. It wasn't just waking up. It was the overwhelming sense that he wasn't alone. That night was no different. His eyes fluttered open to the darkness of his room. At first there was only silence, but then came the familiar sensation. A weight pressing against his chest. The air around him felt thicker than it should, heavy with something unseen. Something watching. Then he heard it. A whisper, so low it was almost just a breath, but it came from the corner of his room. Ethan's pulse spiked. His breath became shallow. Slowly, as if his body knew something his mind refused to accept, he turned his head toward the farthest corner. His eyes struggled to adjust to the blackness, but then he saw it. A figure, tall, still, motionless, yet somehow alive. It stood there, watching. Ethan tried to convince himself he was still dreaming. Maybe this was sleep paralysis. He had read about that too. But then the figure shifted, just slightly, just enough for him to see the slow rise and fall of its shoulders. It was breathing. Ethan's entire body locked in fear. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. It felt as though an invisible force was pressing down on him, pinning him to the mattress. His fingers trembled against the sheets, but he couldn't even lift them. Then the whisper came again, low, guttural, like a voice that didn't belong to anything human. He sees you. A wave of nausea rolled through Ethan's stomach. His mind screamed at him to run, to move, to do anything. But he was paralyzed. He could feel his heartbeat thudding in his throat, a desperate, suffocating rhythm. And then his bedside lamp flickered, just for a second. A single flash of dim, sickly yellow glow illuminated the room. And in that fleeting moment, Ethan saw it. The figure was no longer in the corner. It was standing right next to his bed. A strangled gasp escaped Ethan's throat. He barely registered it. His eyes locked onto the figure, now close enough that he could almost feel its breath. The flickering light cast its face in a shifting nightmare of shadows and light. The features were wrong, twisted, shifting as though they refused to settle into a fixed form. Its mouth, if it could even be called that, was stretched too wide, curving into something that resembled a grin, but wasn't. Not really. The air grew colder. Ethan's skin prickled as if a phantom wind had passed through him. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, his lungs refusing to work properly. And then it moved, slow, deliberate, leaning in closer, its face mere inches from his. He sees you. The voice scraped against Ethan's eardrums like nails on glass, reverberating inside his skull. The words didn't just sound like a warning, They felt like a sentence. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, his entire body shaking. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But then the bed dipped. Something pressed down next to him, the mattress sinking ever so slightly. Ethan's body stiffened. His eyes snapped open. The figure was still there, closer now, its head tilting, observing him. And then something cold. Ice-cold fingers brushed against his arm. Ethan jerked violently, and in that instant the spell was broken. His body could move again. He threw himself off the bed, scrambling backward, his breath coming in ragged, panicked bursts. His eyes darted around the room, but it was empty. The corner was just a corner. The bed was just a bed. The figure gone. A deep, suffocating silence filled the room, broken only by the pounding of his own heartbeat. For minutes he stood there, his body trembling, his mind desperately trying to rationalize what had just happened. Had he imagined it? Slowly, cautiously, he reached for his phone. His fingers felt numb as he checked the time. 3 a.m. He exhaled shakily. Maybe it had just been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. Then his phone screen flickered. For half a second, a reflection on the black screen didn't match his movements, because behind him, standing in the corner, was the figure, still watching, still waiting. And then the whisper came one last time. "He sees you." The tapping on the window. Mia had always been afraid of the dark. As a child, she would bury herself under layers of blankets, convinced that if she covered every inch of her body, nothing could reach her. The shadows that pooled in the corners of her room felt alive, shifting, stretching, waiting for her to peek out. But as she grew older, she forced herself to ignore the fear. The dark wasn't dangerous. It was just an absence of light. That's what she told herself. Until that night. The night that made her realize some fears are not irrational. Some fears are warnings. She woke up suddenly, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment she didn't know why. The room was silent, her bedside clock glowing with the time. 3 a.m. A chill settled in her bones. Something was wrong. Then she heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Mia's breath caught in her throat. The sound was coming from her window, from the second floor. Her mind raced. It had to be the wind, maybe a loose branch scraping against the glass. It was the only thing that made sense. But then it came again. Tap, 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 deliberate, rhythmic, like fingertips drumming against the pane. Slowly, she turned her head toward the window. Her curtains were open. She never left them open. The blood in her veins turned to ice. Something was there. At first it was just a shadow, an outline against the night. But then her eyes adjusted, and she saw it. A face pressed against the glass. Mia's stomach dropped. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to move, to run, to hide. But she couldn't. She could only stare. The face was wrong. Its features were distorted, stretched in ways that didn't make sense. Its skin was pale, almost translucent. The mouth was twisted into a grin that was too wide, its lips pulled back far beyond what should have been possible, and the eyes, black, empty pits. They weren't looking at her, they were inside her. Mia's breaths turned to ragged gasps, her body trembling under the weight of unseen terror. Then in the stillness of the night, she saw it raise one hand. A long, thin finger stretched out, and it tapped. Tap, tap, tap. Mia's body locked in place. She couldn't look away, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The thing on the other side of the glass tilted its head, studying her, as if waiting. Then it knocked hard. A sharp, deliberate sound that rattled the window pane. Her lamp flickered. For one terrible second the room was plunged into darkness, and in that moment she felt it. Something shifted in the room. It wasn't outside anymore. Her breath hitched. The light came back. The window was empty. Mia's stomach churned. Had she imagined it? The terror in her veins told her no. Then she saw it. A single word, written in the fog on the glass. Soon. Mia's body finally obeyed her. She bolted out of bed, stumbling back until she hit the farthest wall, her knees buckling beneath her. Her mind screamed for logic, for an explanation. There was no way someone had been outside. Her room was on the second floor. There was nothing below her window. No ledge, no tree, no way for anyone to stand there. Unless it hadn't been standing. Unless it had been crawling. The thought sent ice through her veins. Her shaking hands reached for her phone. Call someone, anyone. But as she lifted the screen, her reflection flashed back at her, and behind her. The closet door was open. Her stomach clenched. She had shut it before bed. She always shut it. Something inside shifted. A slow, deliberate movement. Then a whisper, low, ragged. Let me in. Mia barely registered the scream tearing from her throat as she lunged for the bedroom door. Her fingers fumbled with the handle, cold, slippery with sweat. The whisper came again. Closer. Let me in. She yanked the door open and ran. She didn't stop until she was in the living room, gasping for air, her body shaking so violently she thought her bones might break. She grabbed her phone again, desperate, trying to dial. But the screen flickered, and then the message changed. The word on the fogged-up window wasn't soon anymore. It was behind you. The hallway that shouldn't exist. Nathan had only lived in his new apartment for a few weeks when the nightmares started. They were always the same. A hallway, long, endless, stretching beyond the limits of reality. The walls were lined with doors, hundreds of them, all identical, all closed. And in every dream he stood at the entrance, watching. But something was inside. He never saw it, but he heard it, the sound of shuffling feet, moving between the doors, slow, deliberate, getting closer. Each night he woke up at exactly 3 a.m., heart pounding, drenched in sweat. At first he dismissed it, just a recurring nightmare, a side effect of stress, nothing more, until the night the dream became real. Nathan's eyes snapped open, 3 a.m., but something was different this time. The air felt thick, heavy with something he couldn't name. A cold, stale scent filled his nostrils. Dust, rot, something old. And then he noticed it, where his bedroom door should have been. There was an opening, a hallway. The hallway. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. His skin prickled with cold terror. This was impossible. He was awake. This wasn't a dream. But the hallway stretched out before him just as it had in his nightmares. And then the sound came. Shuffle. A slow, dragging movement in the darkness. Nathan's stomach twisted into a knot. His instincts screamed at him to run, close the door, get away, but he was frozen. Shuffle. Closer. The darkness inside the hallway seemed to breathe, shifting as if something enormous was moving just out of sight. And then a door creaked open. Nathan's breath hitched. He couldn't see which one. It was too dark, too deep. But he felt it. Something had stepped out. Something was watching him. Panic surged through his veins. He turned, lunged for the door, his real door, and slammed it shut. The second it closed, the air changed. The room was normal again. His bedroom door was back where it should have been. The hallway was gone, but the silence was wrong. And then a whisper from the other side of the door. "You left the door open last time." Nathan's body locked. Last time. No, this was the first time. It had to be, didn't it? His hand trembled as he reached for the door handle, his breath shallow and uneven. He had to check. He had to know. Slowly he turned the knob. It wouldn't move. The door was locked, but he hadn't locked it. His heart pounded against his ribs as the whisper came again. "We remember you." Nathan stumbled back. Number. This wasn't real. He turned on every light in his apartment, but the shadows still felt wrong, as if they were stretching just a little too far. The air felt different, like the apartment wasn't his anymore. The clock beside his bed ticked on, but time felt frozen. He sat awake until dawn, unable to close his eyes, too afraid that when he did, the hallway would be there again. Nathan never slept in that apartment again. He left the next day, breaking his lease, taking nothing with him but the clothes on his back. He didn't care about the money, consequences. He just needed to leave. But the nightmares followed him. Every night the hallway was waiting, the doors stretching into darkness, and something moving between them, watching, waiting. And now when he wakes up at 3 a.m., heart hammering, body drenched in sweat, he no longer looks at his bedroom door, because deep down he knows. One night, when he least expects it, the hallway will be there again, and this time the door will already be open. In the depths of the night, these three unsettling tales remind us that the shadows hold more than darkness. They hold secrets, a whisper in the cold, the tapping on a forgotten window, and a hallway that should never be, all echo a single truth. The unknown is always watching, waiting, and sometimes it finds us when we least expect it. As you step back into your reality, remember, there is always more beneath the surface. What do you think lurks in the silence of your own midnight? Share your theories in the comments below. If these stories sent chills down your spine, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the mysterious. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of our descent into the unknown. Until next time, stay vigilant, for the darkness never truly sleeps.